Hi, and welcome to Your Gov Non-Part, Political Science and Government for Everyone. I'm your host, Paul Campbell. Today we're going to talk about presidential proclamations. Now before we start, we're going to talk a little bit about semantics, the meaning of words. Because proclamation is a very formal sounding word, and you don't hear it a lot, but it's the intent of the word proclamation is often conveyed in other ways. When we declare something or make a declaration of something, it is a proclamation. When something is pronounced, it is a proclamation. When we declare, for example, a federal disaster area, that is a presidential proclamation. Proclamations can be made by any authority that has the jurisdiction to make a proclamation. A president, a governor, a mayor. You could even think of it as a minister or an imam or a rabbi or a justice of the peace performing a wedding ceremony. At the end of the ceremony, I now pronounce you man and wife. And this pronouncement is a proclamation that puts the license that you've gotten and the entire process that you've gone through is now put into effect. And that's something we'll get into here shortly. Presidential proclamations, however, fall into two basic categories, those which are ceremonial and those which are substantive. And we'll discuss the differences between those two, but a presidential proclamation is not just one thing that we think of, okay, the president's made a proclamation. There are actually two pretty different types of presidential proclamations. Now, one of the things that we should touch on is that proclamation is used in a different context in other forms of government. The United States is not the only form of government in the world. There are many types of government, and in monarchies, for example, proclamation is used in many different ways. When there's a change in the monarchy, when a monarch leaves the throne, say either because of death or abdication, and a prince is elevated, he is proclaimed to be the king or the emperor. So it's used in different contexts in different forms of government. We'll cover that hopefully in future videos on how proclamations are made. Another good example too is when somebody in a monarchy knights someone. They again use the word pronounce. It is still a royal proclamation, but when I pronounce you Sir Elton John, or I pronounce you Sir Laurence Olivier, that knighthood, that pronouncement is a royal proclamation. And so it's used a little differently than it's used in the United States under a federal republic. Which brings us to the difference between ceremonial and substantive. But it should be understood, first of all, that a proclamation is not a law. It does not carry the force and effect of law, at least in the United States and in most federal republics. It is not a law. It doesn't carry the force and effect of law. A monarch can maybe, in some monarchies, do that. He can make a proclamation and it's law, but not in the United States. It is a statement, almost invariably a written statement, by the executive, in our case a president, which is essentially a statement of policy. That's the easiest way to think about it. Alright, so we said there's two types, the ceremonial and the substantive. Let's start with the ceremonial. Ceremonial proclamations, again, fall into two separate groups, really. There are those which are puff pieces. They are a matter of literally ceremony. The most widely known and the oldest one in the United States is every year on Thanksgiving Day in November, the President declares a national day of Thanksgiving. And this has been happening every Thanksgiving Day since 1863, when President Lincoln started doing this. It doesn't have any real force and effect of law. It doesn't have any real meaning. It is a ceremony, that today is a day of thanksgiving. Although a ceremony called ceremonial, there are other proclamations which are still carry a little more weight, and these are statements of, definitely statements of policy. You might think of a proclamation for, it doesn't call for action, okay? A substantive proclamation calls for action. A ceremonial one is a statement of policy. So if the president were to give a proclamation, a statement declaring that the United States does not negotiate with terrorists, that is a statement of policy. It's not a law. It is a statement of how the United States, what our policy will be in foreign relations. Substantive proclamations, on the other hand, a little more complex. And again, fall into subcategories. There are those that the president carries out as in his constitutional role as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And this is something that we will discuss in a future video when we discuss the Emancipation Proclamation. But these are, again, not laws, but they are, I guess, essentially orders to departments. Let's, in that case, the Department of Defense. A proclamation for a federal disaster area would be a substantive proclamation that would set in motion other members of the cabinet, other departments that are part of the executive, and would set things in action. Again, this is how I want you to think about the difference between ceremonial and substantive, is one doesn't set things necessarily in action and one substantive ones do. The other one, which is very important, is that sometimes, since they're not laws, but they can be tied to laws, the Congress is the body which has the authority to write and enact laws, bills, acts. They write a bill, they vote on it, both houses, they pass it, it now becomes an act. The act goes to the president for his signature, which he will either sign, not sign, or veto. If he signs it or doesn't sign it within 10 days, it becomes a law. Sometimes the Congress and the president want together a situation where the act, the law, becomes effective upon an event. So they give the president the ability to enact, to make effective, to make active, I think is the best way to think of it, a law. In other words, you write a bill and you pass it through to become an act, and then it goes to the president and he signs it and it's now a law. But in the act it says, shall become effective upon such and such an event. And that event most times will be a presidential proclamation. So the presidential proclamation, the substantive proclamation, is the point at which the law goes into effect. And this is why some laws you'll see in history have been passed in 1 year, and then it might be 2.5 years before it actually goes into effect. You know, a law might be passed in June of 1 year and not go into effect until January 1st, a year or 2 years, 2.5 years later. And this is because the president will make a proclamation saying, yes, bill number such and such shall go into effect on this date. And this is written directly into the law. This is the way that the Congress and the president, believe it or not, really do work together, so that they can time things or adjust things, so that laws are already done. All the work is done, and the effective date is actually what is finally okayed by the president. Now, in future videos, we're going to talk about some historical examples that are very significant, We're going to talk about the two most important ones in United States history, which, of course, is George Washington's Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793, where the United States, he said the United States will not become involved in the conflict between France and Great Britain. And probably the one that comes to most people's minds, the Emancipation Proclamation, signed by Lincoln again in 1863. But again, what many people misunderstand about that is it was not a law. It was a presidential proclamation, but it was not a law. It's a rather complex situation, so we're going to devote an entire video just to probably each one of those. So we hope that this gives you some idea of what a presidential proclamation is and what it is not, and the different types of proclamations and how they work and what they're for. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this episode of Your Gov Non-Parts issue on presidential proclamations. We hope you'll take time and pick subscribe above. If you do, you might want to pick the little checkbox there that says please send me email updates so you know immediately when we've posted a new video. You can find us on Facebook. We're also available on a new thing called MoTube, which allows you to get instant updates whenever we post a new video straight to your mobile phone. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. We'll be happy to get back to everyone just as soon as we possibly can. We'd really like it if you'd take time to rate this video. We'd prefer if you liked it, but at any rate, if you would rate the video. And as always, thank you for watching.